the nails for me. You took the nails. You took the nails for me. How can I repay you for that day at Calvary? You had the power to save yourself, but you thought of me instead. And oh, what a sad.
Thank you all for coming this evening. Really appreciate seeing everyone here. We're going to get started in just a second.
So we're going to try to keep the event, informative, concise, and also make sure we leave time for you all to meet some new people, because there's a lot of awesome people in this room right now, and I do hope you get to know one another while you're here. This is a very special place for me. This is actually the church where I was baptized back in 2019. Yes, the Kingdom House Christian Center. Yeah. So I just want to thank Pastor Rob, Pastor Tanya, Tim, Larry, the entire team that's hosting us here today. The volunteers out in the parking lot, everybody who is here to make this incredible church open and accessible to us. We and Michelle Collins, the entire team has just been fantastic. Obviously I am the MP for Durham, which is on the other side of Toronto. But we thought this would be a great place to do it, given Kingdom House was very involved in helping us promote the petition, and also so that we could bring more people together from different parts of the Toronto area. So appreciate all of you who helped us get this petition out to people, who signed it, who shared it. We have had tens of thousands of Canadians support this petition across the country. And it is, I think, sent a very, very clear message that people are concerned about the issues that we've raised and are hopeful that the federal government will take action on these items. When we first launched this petition back in December of last year, there was a lot of criticism, as you probably could imagine, from the media and from other politicians who tried to point out that we are making hay out of nothing and suggesting that Christians have no reasons to be concerned, that we were overstating some of the political issues and policy issues and legal issues in the country. But just before Christmas, our concerns had been very, very clearly validated when the Standing Committee on Finance in the federal government put forward a recommendation to remove the advancement of religion as a charitable activity in the Income Tax Act. I probably don't need to tell you how much of a problem that would be for churches and Christian charities across our country, and not just Christian, but certainly including charities of any faith, all places of worship, would be potentially gutted by that type of policy. But that just gets casually thrown out by the government these days. And I think it's a very good reflection of sort of where the country is on some of these issues of religious freedom and liberty. We have, whether it's parents being concerned about what's happening in the schools, conscience rights for workers, including nurses and doctors, and of course, the series of crimes that have targeted churches across our country, resulting in over 100 churches in Canada being burned down or vandalized since 2021. The objective reality is there, that for many Christians in our country, the laws and policies of the land have actually been quite stifling in our ability to live according to our traditions and our values. And what I think is very important about what we I hope have been able to accomplish by advancing this petition, and I hope you all would agree with me, that we've tried to make it very clear that this is about whether we are free to live according to our values, whether religious people of various stripes are free to live according to their values and their culture. This is not asking other people to live a certain way. And I think that's a very important distinction here, because for so long, when Christians speak about what our experience is like in this political culture, there has been this effort to cast us as tyrants, that we are trying to use the power of the law or the power of the government to force other people to live according to our values. And while that dynamic has persisted for years, in our political culture, it is our rights and freedoms that have actually been infringed upon. It is not absurd for a mother or a father to say, I have rights to decide how my child is educated and on important decisions involving my child's identity. It is not absurd for a doctor or a nurse to say, I don't want my job threatened because I don't want to participate in euthanasia. It is not absurd for Christians to say that we deserve a better law enforcement response to churches being burned down across our country. And it's certainly not absurd for Christians and other religious people to say threatening to take away the charitable status of our places of worship and our charities is not constitutional and it's not acceptable. So I believe that our demands and our hopes are actually quite straightforward and quite common sense, and that's why we've picked up so much support across Canada. I think you'll be heartened to know that a large percentage, the majority of our support for this petition has come from the province of Ontario, which we were very, very happy to see, not just because I am a member of parliament that represents a riding in Ontario, but also that we are in a province where there are a lot of people concerned about these issues, and sometimes we are gaslit by politicians or the media to think that these are not things that diverse, vibrant communities would be concerned about. I can assure you that is not the case. So we also just want to recognize there are some conservative candidates who are here. Lionel Loganathan, Belen Matthew, Michael Guglielmin, and I think there's probably more that I may have missed, and if so, I apologize, but I do appreciate that people who are working in politics and are engaged in politics have decided to show up today, because a lot of the action is going to require cooperation and partnership from people outside of politics and people inside of politics to get things done. So I think that's enough for me for the time being. The way we're going to structure our time is we're going to hear a series of 4 presentations, one on each of the 4 issues that is identified in our petition: parental rights, conscience rights, crimes targeting churches, and protecting the legal status of Christian charities. I'll invite all of our speakers up at once so that they can all take their seats, and then they'll do their presentations, and then we will ask if you'd like to submit a question for them or for me. You're welcome to do that in writing. There were questions, I think, solicited when you first walked in the entrance, and if you have any other things you want to add, feel free to flag down one of our staff who are here. If Joseph and Peter could just stand up so everyone knows there's Joseph, and Peter might... There, he's at the back. So if you have a question you'd like to suggest as you hear the presentations, please do let them know, and they will add that to the list. We're going to start by welcoming up Peter Copeland. Peter will be doing his presentation on conscience rights. Yes, give him a big round of applause. Look at that jacket, ladies and gentlemen. Peter is the Deputy Director of Domestic Policy at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, where he researches and explores policy for improving our country. Next, we're going to welcome up Pastor Randy Nielsen. Pastor, yes, another round of applause. Again, look at the jackets these guys decided to wear today. Incredible. Pastor Randy will be doing his presentation on crimes targeting Christian churches. He's the lead pastor of Hope City Church here in Brampton, alongside his wife Jill. He also heads up the apostolic operations at Hope City Church. Our third presenter is Kwesi Opoku. Yes, give him a round of applause. Less colorful of a jacket, but still very nice. Kwesi will be doing his presentation on the charitable status of protecting the charitable status of Christian charities and churches. He's a chartered professional accountant and a tax manager at Zeifmans in Toronto. And finally, we have Pastor Joel St. John. Yes. Also looking very stylish. Pastor Joel will be presenting on parental rights. He currently serves as an associate pastor at Liberty Church in Bowmanville. Pastor Joel was also instrumental in drafting the petition that we are sort of focusing our attention on today. So we're going to start by welcoming up Peter. Peter, if you'd like to, you've got 10 minutes. We look forward to your thoughts on conscience rights. Thank you.
Okay. Well, hello, everyone. It's a real privilege to be here. I first met Jamil some years ago when we were working in the provincial government of Ontario, and I actually met Pastor Rob Meikle there as well. So it's great to be here at a place that I've heard a lot about. I am a Christian convert, like Jamil, and I think for those of us converts in the room, the importance of conscience is particularly stressed, I think, because you really have to be attuned to the call to make the decision, I think, to convert to the faith in today's day and age where there aren't that many social benefits to doing so. I'm going to speak to you about first the theological and philosophical importance of conscience, then the legal landscape in Canada with respect to freedom of conscience and freedom of religion, and then talk about some solutions, but we'll get to that more in the panel. So I would argue conscience, rightly understood, is the deepest seat of understanding, conviction, and value from which we operate. It is not mere sentiment or preference, but an inner faculty combining reason, emotion, and moral judgment, guiding us toward what is true, good, and beautiful, and ultimately toward God. In the Christian tradition, drawing from scripture and natural law, affirms that conscience is not autonomous, but oriented toward truth. In Genesis, we hear that man is made in the image of God, endowed with reason and moral agency. Christ himself declares in John, "You shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free," linking true freedom not to unbridled choice, but to alignment with reality. And St. Thomas Aquinas notes that conscience is the application of natural law through which we discern moral action. He emphasizes that a properly formed conscience must seek truth, not be shaped by emotion or ideology. Yet if one sincerely believes an action to be morally wrong, even if mistaken, you must not act against your conscience. So conscience, then, it's the means by which we participate in divine wisdom, the faculty most attuned to the Holy Spirit, the advocate, the paraclete that Jesus sent to us as our guide after his departure. And at the philosophical level and political, conscience is the bridge between belief and action, allowing us to act with integrity, to unite our convictions with our choices. To act against our conscience is to fracture our identity, to live as someone else. And indeed, as one of our eminent professors of law in Canada here, Brian Bird, argues, living conscientiously sustains and develops integrity and identity, while living unconscientiously leads to the opposite result. So the harm of violating your moral commitments is not akin to the mere disappointment of unmet preferences. It erodes one's self-worth and dignity. And this has profound implications for moral agency and justice. Only when conscience is protected can we engage in free moral action, rather than comply out of fear, compulsion, or cynicism. A society that forces people to act against conscience breeds hypocrisy, and moral disintegration, replacing authentic conviction with state-imposed ideology. Now, the liberal order in which we inhabit, it emphasizes the utilitarian function of conscience primarily. So it's a bulwark against tyranny and protector of free expression. Without the free exchange of ideas, we're not able to advance knowledge. Yet this overemphasis, I would say, on utility and subjectivity has led liberalism to become unmoored from its Judeo-Christian roots and the connection between conscience and objective truth, reducing it to mere personal preference. And we now, I think, as a result, live in a society of hyper-individualism where this crude utilitarian moral ethic, which ironically requires an ever larger state to fill the void left by the fractured communities and families that have resulted from this moral relativism. So that's a bit of the background on why conscience is important, I'd say from the theological and then the philosophical perspective. Now, what about it in law and policy here in Canada? Under the law, it's established in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, under Section 2, the Fundamental Freedoms Clause of the Charter, alongside freedom of speech and thought and expression. So it clearly has paramount importance, only limited, in fact, by Section 1, which sets out the reasonable limits clause. However, I think we find in practice many of the other rights in the Charter and even federal legislation, provincial legislation, end up taking paramount, even though freedom of religion and conscience are in fact fundamental freedoms. And this, I would argue, it's a bit due to judicial philosophy. You may have heard of, this living tree, progressive style of interpretation wherein the law can change meaning over time so long as, the judges deem this to be, the proper way, the evolved meaning of the terms. And also due to the nature of the legal tests that have been employed. So the test to adjudicate rights claims under Section 1 was established in the Oakes case in the 80s, and it's a test that determines when rights limitations are justified. And it has 4 key factors. So first, you ask the question, is there a pressing and substantial objective? Is the government's objective important enough to limit a constitutional right? Then there's a proportionality test with 3 factors. First, rational connection. Is the law logically connected to the objective, or is it arbitrary? Minimal impairment. Does the law infringe on rights as little as possible? And third, proportionality of effects. Do the law's benefits outweigh its negative impact on rights? So, I don't know about you, but looking at some of this language, maybe you think, oh, okay, that language is a little vague, broad. What do these terms mean? And maybe you'd think, well, it's spelled out quite clearly somewhere. But in fact, no, it's not. It is quite vague and subjective, and it gives broad latitude to judges to determine what constitutes, for example, minimal impairment, and how does the proportionality test get carried out between incommensurate principles that are vaguely defined. So I would say that the nature of the tests and the judicial philosophy that's prevalent has led to a lack of respect for and upholding of these fundamental freedoms. And the types of rights claims that end up typically having paramountcy, Section 15 rights, equality rights, and collective or positive rights, they're the ones that are often trumping the fundamental freedoms, freedom of religion, freedom of conscience. I'll just say a bit about some key cases and then the domains in which we find these conflicts most prevalent. So one, Big M Drug Mart in the 80s, the Supreme Court struck down the Lord's Day Act, ruling that forcing businesses to close on Sundays violated religious freedom. This case affirmed, in fact, that freedom of religion includes freedom from coercion. So this is a tension that we'll see, in fact, with claims like freedom of conscience and religion. It's very important to how they are determined and adjudicated, because they can, if you are a religious entity or a charity or what have you, trying to inculcate norms at a society level or through your own organization, they can sometimes come up against other individual rights claims. And so it's important to unpack how that gets litigated. Another one, Loyola High School versus Quebec, just in 2015. A Catholic high school successfully challenged Quebec's requirement to teach ethics and religion from a secular perspective, reaffirming the right of religious institutions to teach according to their beliefs. So you see really kind of a varied landscape here. In some cases, religious freedom and freedom of conscience is upheld, and in others it's not. And I hope we can unpack this further in the panel. With respect to equality rights, it's another main area in which they come into conflict. We see this often in education with parental rights and in spaces like the medical professions, where practices like euthanasia and abortion, if you have a conscientious objection to that, there isn't really a consistent approach across the country. Some provinces, in fact, require what's called an effective referral, which means that even if you don't want to perform it, you have to effectively refer to someone who does. And many would argue this conflicts against with conscience rights. So I won't say too much more here. I will just allude to, I think, some of the problems that and tensions we face, and I think in particular the judicial landscape. It's really challenging because there's no easy fix for this. Even if you legislate, for example, that effective referrals don't need to be provided, that may be challenged. And depending on the judges sitting on the court and the current nature of the Supreme Court, I would say it's unlikely in some cases that we're going to be successful. So I think the long game of changing the judicial philosophy and getting better appointments on our superior courts is needed, and look forward to discussing later on. Thank you.
Well, that was great. I learned some things. My presentation really is about something that's sensitive to most of us, and that's the attacks against churches, against places of worship all across our nation. I'm Randy Nielsen. I pastor here in the city, but I was born and raised in Edmonton in Alberta. I've lived in BC and Alberta, Manitoba, Prince Edward Island. I was in the military, traveled all over every part of Canada, so I've come to love it, love the people, and seen the benefit that we have across Canada of the matrix of people that God has brought to us. So it seems that even in my short life, we've seen a dramatic change in the way people look at Christianity and the freedoms that we have. Instead of looking at the church as a place where they can get help, one that is accepting, forgiving, and one that is really an aid to society, it's being looked on as something much opposite to that. And unfortunately, it seems that this mix of perception is perpetrated by a lot that are in government. And I'm not pointing to elected officials, but I'm looking at government as a whole. The media presents the Christian world as one that's antagonistic to everyone else. We know that's not the case, but nevertheless, that's the perception. In fact, when I was looking into a study on this, it seemed that it really hit the mainstream in 2021. Perhaps you remember May 27th. I'm just going to read something here. May 27th, 2021, Roxanne Casimir, chief of the Kamloops Indian Band, announced that ground-penetrating radar had located the remains of 215 missing children in an apple orchard on the site of a former residential school. Well, politicians and media just jumped on that. I'm sure you remember it. And stories of mass unmarked graves and burials of missing children ricocheted around Canada and indeed around the world. I was traveling during some of that time, and people were connecting with me from as far away as India, saying, what's going on in Canada? Is this what it is? The media presented it like the killing fields of Cambodia, that this is what had happened. And then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau set the tone in a public response by ordering Canadian flags to be lowered to half-staff on all federal buildings to honor, and this is in quotes from his words, 215 children whose lives were taken at the Kamloops Residential School. And so that elevated everything that the possible burials really were a status and victim of foul play and making Canada sound like a place that murders children. We've lived through that. And consequently, people that were not the ones that were attending those churches, I trust, but ones that had an activist mentality, started burning churches. It started off in Osoyoos, in the Okanagan, down by the American border, burned 2 churches in Penticton and Osoyoos. There were heritage churches. And then it spread up into other indigenous areas where it ended up being, let me read a couple of the other things. But 33 churches have been burnt down totally. And that's a travesty in our nation. But instead of the government leaders coming across and calling it hate crimes, they said it's very unfortunate. It should never happen. But we understand why this anger is there and why they would take this result. Over the next 7 weeks, 13 incidents of mischief and vandalism on churches occurred in Vancouver alone. Calgary police reported 10 churches defaced on Canada Day alone in 2021. Between May 21 and December 23, at least 33 churches were burned to the ground, as I mentioned. And as was mentioned by MP Jamil, the actual number now of churches that have been vandalized or burnt down is 112 across the country from coast to coast. So this is real, and it touches us all. In fact, it's personal to me because one that's made national news was in Morinville, Alberta. And it was a heritage church that was in the center of town, built in 1907. Huge edifice. I've been in the building. My brother's wife attended the church. And the impact it's had on that community has been devastating. Excuse me. And now it's being rebuilt many years later. But it had nothing to do with anything negative. The Civil Rights League of Canada from the Catholic Church has documented at least 85 Catholic churches damaged by fire vandalism in the 18 months following the Kamloops report. An update in summer of 23 that there was a church in Manitoba, in the Pine Creek First Nations in Manitoba, where they discovered through, again, this same ground-penetrating radar that there were 14 different areas where they felt there was burials. So in the summer of 23, students spent, forensic archaeologists from Brandon went there and actually excavated the basement to see what was there, and they found 0 bodies, 0 evidence of human remains. The other places have not been excavated. So why is this an issue? Well, our government has a responsibility to protect all people in Canada. That's the responsibility. Doesn't matter whether they're religion, doesn't matter about color of skin or background, none of that. But it doesn't appear that that's the case in all places. I have the privilege of sitting with leaders from all faiths as part of the Regional Peel interfaith community. And in that area, whenever something happens in a mosque or a Hindu temple, The police are there immediately. It's front page news, and it's called a hate crime. When things happen against churches, it's unfortunate, but you shouldn't do that. There's a double standard. So we want, we've seen has the assault of churches stopped? Let me put it that way. Less than a week away, a church fire north of Prince Albert on February 21st is also suspected of arson. I've been up in that area as well. Why does it matter to us as Christians? Well, we are the silent majority in Canada. Most recent census says 63.2% of Canadians are Christian. 26.3% have no religion. 3.7% Muslim, 1% Jewish, and yet the pressure seems to be here. I love the Bible. You know that as you do. Proverbs 14:34, righteousness exalts a nation. That's what we look for. Proverbs 29:2 says, when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. It's time for us to exercise the spiritual authority that God has given us. We're called to be salt and light in the community. That means we are a positive influence. Churches, believers are a positive influence in the community. I firmly believe that churches are called to be safe places. They're called to be a place of care and acceptance, but they're portrayed in media as well as through many government leaders as just the opposite of that. Churches need to take their place as solution centers for hurting society. Some steps have already been taken. I celebrate MP Mark Dalton, whose advanced Bill 411 is through first reading, and it's a bill to make arson of wildfires, when we know how significant that was across the country a couple of years ago, but also places of worship, making those, anyone convicted of that, to have, for it to be an indictable offense with a minimum of 5 years in prison, up to a maximum on a second conviction, up to life. So consequently, really to increase the penalties involved. There's been a security in infrastructure programs. Grants have been given out to places of worship. If you haven't got one yet, wait till they come around next time, and that helps us to increase our security around the buildings. And then we appreciate so much Honorable Jamil for bringing this petition to light, but also standing up and bringing the whole situation of what's going on across our nation, especially through governmental entities, bringing that to light so that we can stand up and say, no, the time is done. We need to stand up and say yes to Christianity to rise in Canada and for it to take its place, not just as a foundation from many years ago, but as a power to move forward for Canada. Thank you so much.
Okay, my name is Kwesi Poku. I'm a tax manager at Zyphman's LLP. Jamil's asked me to come and give a presentation from an accountant's perspective on what might be the consequences of some of these proposed changes. For an organization to obtain charitable status, it needs to make an application to the CRA. The most salient question in that application is, what is the charitable purpose of the organization? Now, the Income Tax Act is actually silent on what is the definition of a legitimate charitable purpose. Instead, the CRA relies on court precedent going back to 1871 that defined 4 broad categories of legitimate charitable purposes. They are the relief of poverty, the advancement of religion, the advancement of education, and other purposes that are beneficial to the community. Now, in December of 2024, the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance put forward a recommendation to amend the Income Tax Act to add a definition of charitable purpose that removed the privileged status of the advancement of religion as a legitimate charitable purpose. In addition to that, They also recommended the removal of charitable status from any organization that was against abortion. Now, the organization that put forward the brief that was a framework for that recommendation was the BC Humanist Society. In their brief, they pointed towards changes in the UK that codified a definition of charitable purpose to remove what they called, quote, theistic worldviews. It's not lost on me that in the UK's Charities Act of 2006, they required religious organizations to demonstrate what they called a social benefit, which was defined by government officials in order for them to maintain their charitable status. Not too long after that, in October of 2024, there was a gentleman seen praying not too far from an abortion clinic in the UK, silently. He was arrested, charged, and then convicted for what was essentially thought crime. In their decision, the UK court stated that the man clearly demonstrated a disapproval for abortion because he was slightly leaning his head and clasping his hands. That was enough for the thought crime. What I'm trying to say here is that the Income Tax Act is not just an innocuous technical document. It's the means by which those with secular worldviews can disempower and remove resources from Christians and other people of faith so that they can advance their more radical worldviews without any resistance. This all begs the question, what should we do to fight back? I have 3 proposals. First, religious organizations should partner with MPs like Jamil who share their convictions and put forward their own policy initiatives. Those recommendations will act as a counterweight to the more secular elements in our society and demonstrate to the government that there is a vocal and organized opposition to the secularization of our values. Secondly, become a CPA or encourage more young people to become CPAs. I know very few people in my profession who share my faith. Even the folks who do have a faith, though they don't share mine, they don't seem to feel like they have a stake in the religious freedoms of this country. The more informed professionals that we can bring to our side, the more effective our advocacy work will be. And lastly, make generous contributions to your churches. For as long as this country continues to allow religious organizations to maintain their charitable status, exploit that opportunity to fund their advocacy work. It's going to be a whole lot cheaper to fund that work while you can still qualify for a tax credit than after you can't and you're fighting to be able to qualify for that tax credit. That's my presentation. Thank you very much.
A bit taller, so. Good evening, everyone. I'm thankful to be here. Thank you to the Honorable MP Jamil and my panelists that I get to share. I have the privilege of talking about definitely the last but not the least, but the most inflammatory topic of our time, parental rights. The rights of parents to play a leading role in their children's education and in important life decisions, I would argue, is pre-political, constitutional, and a moral imperative that's grounded in natural law, legal jurisprudence, empirical child development science, and of course, biblical principles. This right is, of course, not absolute, but it is primary, requiring a high threshold before state intervention is justified. The contemporary political landscape, however, increasingly frames parental rights as oppositional to child welfare, particularly in debates on gender identity, policies, and of course, educational authority. So I would say a strong defense of parental authority, I would say, has four things. One, the pre-political nature of parental rights in natural law, constitutional protections and legal precedent, empirical research on child development and parental involvement, and of course, the biblical and theological foundation of parental stewardship. Parental authority, as I said, is pre-political, meaning parental rights existed before anything called rights or the government existed. It exists independent of the state because the family is the foundational societal unit of all human civilization. John Locke's Second Treatise on Government affirms that parental authority is not a state-bestowed privilege, but a natural and divine duty. He said, parents have a right to govern the education of the children and an obligation to provide for their instruction and improvement in virtue. The state's role is secondary and derivative, ensuring parental authority is exercised justly, but not replacing it. Of course, we see this kind of imperative in Scripture. Genesis 1:28. God commands parents, Adam and Eve, to be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it. This implies stewardship of not just the earth, but also our children. Deuteronomy 6:6-7 also talks about the commandments of God, that we're supposed to impress these commandments on your children. Talk about them when you sit at home and when you walk along the road, when you lie down and when you get up. So I would say the burden of proof lies with the state. Because parental rights are pre-political and the burden of proof rests on the state, not parents, to justify intervention. When we look to the law, we see that there's, of course, protections here. Universal Declaration of Human Rights the Universal Human Declaration of Rights, Article 26, says that parents have a prior right to choose the kind of education that shall be given to their children. It's been cited here, but the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms in Section 2 protects the freedoms of thought and belief, including religious education. Section 7 guarantees liberty in parental decision-making, and Section 15 ensures equality before the law, protecting parents' authority. B&R versus Children's Aid Society in 1995 showed that state intervention must be justified by demonstrable harm. Loyola High School versus Quebec in 2015 established that parents and religious institutions retain the right to direct education according to their values. Now, if we were going to look at science, studies overwhelmingly show that parental involvement improves academic success, mental health, and moral development. When it comes to education, children with high parental engagement achieve higher grades and have lower dropout rates. Strong parental involvement correlates with lower rates of depression, anxiety, and risky behavior. Neuroscience confirms that executive function, which is the prefrontal cortex, maturity continues into the mid-20s, meaning children and adolescents benefit from parental guidance in major life decisions. Now, if you are a believer, you've heard this before. Proverbs 22:6. Train up a child in the way they should go, and when they are old, they will not depart from it. You see, the government cannot replicate parental love, investment, and knowledge. Policy-driven interventions are impersonal, bureaucratic, and often harmful. So something here is the overreaching in the Child Protective Services investigations disproportionately harm lower income and marginalized communities. And this is something to keep in mind, because as much as people talk about justice, unfortunately, this overreach tends to hurt people that are most vulnerable. So this idea of harm is something that's often brought up in this conversation. This is something that you would have heard. It's from John Stuart Mill's harm principle and its limitations. So people would argue that parental authority should be limited when it harms children. But I think there should be a strict criteria when it comes to intervention and what we would call harm. So one, harm must be clearly demonstrable, right? Neglect or abuse. State intervention, we've already seen, often causes greater harm. And parental rejection of a child's identity does not automatically constitute as harm. And of course, we see here in Scripture, when it comes to the prodigal son, parents must be given the space to guide their children, even through disagreements and struggles. Now, one thing that I think is lost in this conversation is the fact that we live in a pluralistic society. So parental rights are not exclusive to religious or conservative families. So anyone, whether they're religious or non-religious, should have equal rights to direct their children's education. And religious families should not be forced to conform to state-imposed curricula that violate their beliefs. Now, in closing, a just society prioritizes parental authority in education and life decisions because parents have a natural and biblical right to educate their children. They are best equipped developmentally and relationally to guide them, and should only be overridden when there's clear, demonstrable harm is present and can be proven. So, I believe there should be a call to action. Christians must defend parental authority. Since we're in the church, I'll say it one more time. Christians must defend parental authority. Also, churches must support families. Churches must support families in resisting harmful governmental policies. And of course, policymakers must respect the God-given role of parents in shaping their children's future. One simple verse from the Psalms, Psalm 127, verses 3. Children are a heritage of the Lord. So the government's role is to support, not replace, parents in fulfilling this divine calling. Thank you.
Okay, can we just get one more round of applause for all of our four distinguished speakers here? You can see the depth of thought that each one of these gentlemen have put into their presentations, and I commend you for speaking from the heart, and thank you very much for what you shared with us. I'm going to invite Joseph to bring me the audience questions, and before I get to that, I do want to draw your attention to this handout that I hope most of you got. If you didn't get one, they are available at the table outside the main door there. The reason we put this together, and there's two sides to this, is a hope that you will be able to start conversations about these issues based on what you might learn today, based on your own observations and experiences. We do believe that a lot of this is about building momentum at the grassroots level, which is why we put a petition forward on this. And we do hope that you will feel empowered leaving today to have conversations about these issues in your own communities, whether it's with Christians, non-Christians, and help people understand that there is a set of decisions have been made that have made the ability to practice Christianity in this country tougher for a lot of Canadians. But thank God we are in a country where the laws and policies actually do provide us with solutions if we're willing to take them. And I think you'll see on the back of this a series of questions that we have found helpful in starting conversations in our communities, and I hope you will find them as well. So without further ado, I do want to get to some questions here. This one says, do you have an opinion or thought on the Catholic School Board abandoning Catholic values, specifically to history, moral actions, and idolistic practices? I think, Peter, maybe I'm going to throw this one at you.
Yes, the resident Catholic here.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think we're fortunate in Ontario to have protections for a Catholic school board. Although obviously there are some serious tensions with respect to government policy and mandates, and also political pressure. And I think in many instances we've seen, kind of caving to that at the expense of upholding certain teachings and values. And I think ultimately, even looking back, just to speak to an Ontario context, how it was founded, the public Catholic school boards, it was a political compromise. And so I think when you look at it, I mean, I even say this as a Catholic, hope you don't share this with too many people in the school board domain. I don't think it's really reasonable going forward to have just a Catholic and public board, protected by the government. I would like to see, something like charter schools or other provisions wherein, parents have more rights to choose where to send their children without, paying double the tax, right, as we do here to send our kids to schools of our choosing. And I think because this is a good example of the influence, the undue pressure being exerted on Catholic schools by the secular state, and so that's something I think we should advocate more for.
I don't know if anyone else wants to weigh in on that. I've got other questions, so I'll come to the other panelists. But I do want to point out, while we're on the topic of parental rights, that there's a provincial election happening right now, today. And Ontario is one of the provinces that has not taken any action to protect parental rights provincially. So if you do get a chance to bring that up with any of your provincial MPPs and representatives, I would certainly encourage you to do that. Okay, we've got a question here that I'm going to start with Kwesi on, which is about professions. And I'll preface the question with, a famous example in Canadian media recently being Jordan Peterson's ordeal with the College of Psychologists, and him articulating quite clearly that he has been politically prosecuted and pushed out of his profession because of his views. There's a question here specific to teachers, but I think you can comment on it maybe broadly as a professional, as an accountant. The question is, the Ontario College of Teachers and others are incredibly litigious. What can be done to protect private citizens and working professionals?
That's a really good question. As an accountant, I never have to think about that because accountants are really, really boring. Like, there's nothing controversial about our profession. I think the best place to start is for those teachers to partner with teachers in other jurisdictions that share your values. I was talking to a gentleman, can't remember his name, he helped you with your website, and he's also a teacher. There he is.
There he is. He's also the guy who designed this logo, by the way. He's a very talented guy. He's got
Yeah,
a
really
lot of-
talented, really talented, and a great grade 8 and grade 7 teacher. So I was talking to him, and he was talking about his experience at Boise and just how like terribly liberal that they were. He only lasted a couple of weeks, and then decided to go to Trent University, a place that shared his values. I think people in these professions who feel like the organization or the leadership don't share their values could do very well by partnering with other people in the profession that do.
You want to add something? Sure.
Yeah, just a quick, that was great, Kwesi. A quick shameless plug for Macdonald Laurier Institute paper on this very topic by Christine Van Geyn. She heads up the Canadian Constitution Foundation. She did a paper, comparing professional standards in various bodies, medicine, law, policing, and puts forward some interesting recommendations there. Interestingly, the test for when one's rights are being violated and compared against a professional standard is in fact an inherently vague one, but it need not be. And provincial legislatures could legislate a stricter test, one that requires judges to give more paramountcy to charter rights. So I would encourage people to check that out if they're interested.
Okay, next question. I'm going to combine a couple here for both Pastor Randy and Pastor Joel. The question is about interfaith dialogue and working with people of different faith communities. Certainly on a lot of these issues would affect people of all religious backgrounds. And I think one of the challenges that we face is how do we build those broad coalitions to actually get things accomplished in the political realm for the good of people of all different faith backgrounds. I'm curious if maybe you could share some insights in your experience in building those bridges.
It's interesting, we're here in Brampton, where a number of years ago, through very good desires, the city council decided to put a committee together to decide where places of worship should go as of right. At that point, there was no place. Every place had to do specific zoning for that. We received a copy, friends of ours received a copy of that, the leaked copy, before it reached council. And we connected with the Sikh, Hindu, Muslims, and Christians, and became a faith coalition, Brampton Faith Coalition. And fortunately and unfortunately, I became the public spokesman for that, and got to address council on numerous occasions, face-to-face, and they were a little bit upset initially because the report had been leaked. And what it did, that report recommended that places of worship be away from any industrial area, so that would remove more than 100 places of worship out of industrial spaces within 2 years without any place to go. So we went head-to-head with the city, hired our own team that was professional team to be able to address that issue, and came out the other side after almost 3 years with multiple places in the city of Brampton where you can have places of worship without rezoning, including within industrial areas, light industrial areas, within 500 meters of residential. So the focus really is we need more places for people to meet. I'm currently a member of the Interfaith Council of Peel, where there's all the religious backgrounds that you can possibly imagine and some you maybe not have heard of. And so we choose to agree on the things that we can agree on. And we don't try to fight one another on the things that we don't. We are all God's creation. That's the bottom line. And we need to be respected because of that. Although I don't agree with my friends from the Muslim background that are strong in their Islamic beliefs, I respect them highly and I count them as friends. So I can have dialogue. I can address it. I've been invited to the mosque to speak. When the Muslims in our city here celebrate their Ramadan and close it off with a festival at the end, I'm often invited to come and pray. And I pray in the name of Jesus in that context. And so and in our church, the day before I was going, we were in a church service, and I said to the people, let's pray for our Muslim friends. God loves them. He's chosen them as much as he's chosen us. For the last month, they've been fasting and praying and believing that their God would help them and enrich their families. We know that the God, the creator of all, loves them, that Jesus died for them. Let's pray for them. When I got up on stage in our Central Park here, Gage Park, I relayed that to the people there and asked if I could pray with them. Thousands of hands went up and they clapped. Because we must care for people, not Christian people, but all people. And so there is a dialogue we can have. There are things we can cooperate on, such as the topics we're talking about tonight. We can cooperate on these. But we cannot compromise on our stand, our biblical stand, and the reality that there's one way to serve, one way to heaven, and that's through Jesus. And we can love them, and hopefully we can bring some with us.
Second everything that was said. I believe on top of that, we have to have our ducks in order, because I find in a lot of ecumenical discussions, if we do not have a unity of what we are looking for, oftentimes we can be pushed into silence. So what I have found when talking to our Muslim friends, our Hindu friends, is that they know what they want and they're very united. But what I have found is us as Christians, we like to squabble. We like to kind of nitpick at things, and it's hard to come to that kind of a place and be united. So in ecumenical conversations, I believe first we need to be united. And I agree, theological discussions are one thing, right? We're not talking about theological discussions when it comes to the government. We're talking about public policy. So we're informed by our theology, yes, but we have to be united to say, hey, parental rights are important. Our buildings can't be burnt. We have to be united so when we come to these discussions, we're not pushed into a corner and it's ecumenical, but the Christians are kind of in the back and we have to be quiet. So that's what I would say when it comes to ecumenical discussions. We have to see ourselves as an equal party at these discussions, and we should be as vocal as possible and as united as possible. So I would just add that to all that Pastor's saying.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. All right, so we've got a couple questions here on legal stuff. So Peter, maybe I'll start with you, and anyone else who wants to chime in is welcome to. The first question is around some changes in New Brunswick that reversed the parental rights legislation that was brought in there, and the role of judicial reviews in being able to push back on things like that. And the second question is regarding any litigation against the government for failing to protect churches that have been attacked. So, around this idea of what do you see as the role of the judicial process, of the courts, in being able to be helpful here? And do you see limitations in whether the courts can help us solve some of these problems?
Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know the specifics of those two cases or sets of cases you've referred to, but I will speak in general. I think, look, like the legal landscape is where all of these issues are ultimately going to play out. Parental rights, freedom of conscience and religion, charitable status, and the criminal code. And so that's why I focused my conversation on, the regnant judicial philosophy and how the laws are being interpreted. And I think it's really where we need to focus our attention. We have courts and and judges who have adopted the living tree, progressive, flexible standards of judicial interpretation. And it's going to take some time to, I would say, replace those judges in that philosophy through appointments and also through the cultivation of an alternate judicial philosophy. Because ultimately, if you're going up to challenge something through judicial review, you've got to almost get lucky to a certain extent, right, with the judges you get. So there are some promising ways in which you can try to legislate, again, to protect in certain areas. So, with respect to the medical field, eliminating effective referrals. But oftentimes there isn't a lot of political will and appetite for these sorts of things. So I really think that, and this is something we're planning to do here at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, is mimic some elements of what the Federalist Society has done in the States and what the Judicial Power Project has done in the United Kingdom, which is create an alternative judicial philosophy, one that emphasizes kind of strict textualist interpretation of the law, and one also that hews more closely to our common law tradition and precedent. Because one thing that's occurring in Canada, the tests that are being deployed by the courts are themselves very vague and broad. And so they give a lot of latitude to judges. But our common law tradition actually is much more narrow and factual and case specific. So if we adopted that kind of approach at the Supreme and Superior Court level, then we wouldn't see, I think, tests and so much power and authority granted to the courts and judges. And so I think the more we promote these ideas, in law schools, Runnymede Society is a great organization for promoting these things in universities, the more we can get to, over time, better judicial philosophy, better judicial appointments, and better outcomes.
Thank you. Anybody else want to weigh in on that one? Okay. So I'm just mindful of the time, and I think it would make sense for us to wrap up at 8. So there's time for us to kind of chat and get to know each other better afterward. So I'm going to kind of try to combine a couple of these questions. There's a series of questions here that are about what do we do to get the word out more? How do we get more people to care about this stuff? I don't know if any of you'd like to kind of weigh in on that, but that is a common theme here in a few of these questions is how do we just get more people to be aware of this, and how do we get more people to want to take action on these issues?
Talk about it. And it might sound so simple, but we don't talk about politics at homes. We try not to rub anyone the wrong way. I think we have to risk being offensive, and we have to risk being offended. I think unless we take that step, there's no getting the word out. Unless at Thanksgiving you ask, what do you think about X? Oh, they share their perspective. And from that conversation, you share your perspective informed by this one pager that we put together, right? I think we just need to start talking. I also believe in churches, we don't need to be preaching about policy, but even as pastors, we can probably do a stronger job of, how can I say it, like contextual theology, of really talking about the context in which we are living in. So in Canada, there's a way of being in Canada. How do I function as a Canadian that's a Christian, that's in this post-Christian culture? What does that even look like? Because oftentimes people, after I would preach, I come down and I'm asked these questions. I'm having to do this at my particular job. What should I do? And it's great that we can exegete a particular passage of scripture, but we need to start doing stronger contextual theology, really leaning into our culture and really start saying, hey, we have to do the hard work of what does it look like to really take the wisdom of God that we have been given in Scripture and applying it specifically to our culture. As the old saying goes, I think we need to start preaching with the Bible in one hand and the newspaper in the other, or in this case, TikTok in the other hand. We need to really start speaking directly to these things. And the more, it might be awkward, but the more we do it, we're going to start seeing a confidence in people because they're hearing it week in and week out, and eventually they'll be brave enough to talk about this and rather say, well, I disagree, but I don't know what to say. So we need to talk about it and arm our people to be able to talk about it.
I think I agree with you 100%. We need to talk about it, but we need to talk about it in a positive way. Instead of pointing to all the things that are not working and pointing to the lifestyle issues that we don't agree with and talking lots about them, we need to talk about what we want that is biblical, that is beneficial, that is helpful to others even outside the church. We need to stand up for the rights of the people around us, not just for our biblical rights. And we need to have friends that the mayor, the councillors, the MPPs, the MPs. We need to not look at ourselves in a inconspicuous manner that we don't belong, that we're second-class citizens. We need to look at ourselves as people of God that hold our head high and be able to speak face-to-face with those in power and be able to care for them. How do you get credibility? You do things in a community that add value to the community. And many don't feel that the church adds value to the community because they may not, other than their own community. And so we need to step outside the walls and be beneficial to those around us.
Yes. Okay. I think what we'll do is we'll wrap up the formal portion of our conversation now, but we will... Oh, sorry, were you pointing at somebody? Oh, you can't hear me? Sorry? Okay. This is a father from the Coptic community who's joined us. We're just going to get him a mic. There we go.
It is a great meeting that we have tonight. But if we close our meeting to this point, I think is not right. One of the pastors said unity. Unity is the most important point and the starting point to ask for our rights. What I am suggesting, why we didn't have a meeting for the heads of the churches all over Ontario, for example, and put all the things that we are discussing tonight to the government. And as one said now, to meet with them and discuss things face to face. I remember back home when we face any disaster in one of our churches or in one of our areas, we meet together and stay in a continuous meeting till the government take an action. And this puts some kind of pressure on the government and make us able to reach our goals. So my idea now is this meeting is great. Number two, we have to organize a meeting between the heads of the churches and then put all our issues that we were discussing tonight, or some of it, and have face-to-face meeting with authorities or with the government. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Well, I would say on that note, if you'd like to work with the Father to organize such a meeting, there's a lot of people in this room who can absolutely make that happen. And this is a great mix of people who I hope will take you up on that offer of organizing a follow-up meeting. I certainly do believe that we have people here today who can make a difference if we keep the momentum going, and that is my hope. That is why we put the petition together, is because we know that there's a lot of power in the people, and the people have to use their voice. So I appreciate your contributions very much. I'm gonna put an end to the formal part. I'm not going anywhere. I'm gonna stick around. If you want to talk with me, I can't speak for everybody, but I think most of us are gonna be sticking around also. So we hope to continue the conversation. I want to just give another round of applause to each of our panelists here today. Thank you very much, guys. And also one more round of applause to each of you for making the trip to be here today. Thank you very much. Oh, yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
I'm grateful. Thank you for you took the nails.
A great light dawns in Galilee. Some say madman, some say king. Wonder-working rebel priest, Jesus Christ the Nazarene. He knew well what it would take to free us all from sin and grave. A perfect man would have to die, and only he could pay that price.